For 3 long winters, someone left fresh bread on his porch every single morning without fail, and the cowboy never saw who it was or heard a single sound. As if the kindness itself moved like the wind and disappeared before dawn, he would open the door, take the bread, and stand there for a moment, confused but silent, telling himself it did not matter. Yet deep inside something began to change, because a man who had forgotten warmth slowly started waiting for it, even if he never admitted it. But then one morning, the cold air felt different. The porch was empty. No bread, no sign, nothing at all. And for the first time in years, his heart did not stay still. It tightened with a strange fear, because he realized that whoever had been there all this time was suddenly gone. And now the silence felt louder than ever before. He lived alone on a quiet ranch far from town where the wind was his only company and the nights felt longer than they should. People in the nearby village knew him as a cold and silent man who kept his distance and never allowed anyone close. He spoke only when needed, and even then his words were short and empty, as if he had locked his feelings somewhere deep inside. No one knew what he had lost or why he chose such a lonely life, but they could see it in his eyes that something inside him was broken. His days were the same: quiet work, long silence, and no reason to hope for anything different. His life moved forward without meaning or warmth, until one morning something unexpected appeared on his porch, a small, simple loaf of bread, and without realizing it, that quiet moment began to change everything. The next morning, he opened the door again with no expectation. Yet there it was, another loaf of warm bread resting quietly on the wooden porch as if it had always belonged there. He paused longer this time, scanning the empty land stretching toward the horizon. But there were no footprints in the dust, no shadow moving in the distance, no sound except the soft whisper of the wind brushing past him. He picked it up slowly, feeling the heat still trapped inside, fresh, carefully made, not something left behind without thought. And for a brief moment, he almost stepped outside to look around, but he stopped himself and went back in, telling himself it meant nothing. Yet the following morning it happened again, and then again, each day the same quiet mystery waiting for him at sunrise. Always fresh, always warm, always placed in the exact same spot, as if someone knew his routine better than he did. Days turned into weeks, and he found himself waking a little earlier, not because he needed to, but because something inside him had started to wait. Even though he would never admit it out loud, he began to notice small details: the way the bread was shaped with care, the slight difference in texture, the faint smell that reminded him of something distant and forgotten. Like a memory he could not fully reach, sometimes he would stand behind the door before opening it, hoping to catch even the smallest sign, a sound of footsteps, a glimpse of movement. But nothing ever came. Whoever was doing this knew how to remain unseen, and that made the silence feel heavier, yet strangely comforting at the same time. Because in a life filled with emptiness, this simple act became something steady, something real. He stopped questioning it and instead accepted it as part of his days, like the sunrise or the fading light at dusk. And without realizing it, the man who trusted no one had begun to rely on someone he had never met. His meals felt less empty, his mornings less cold, and though he never spoke a word about it, the presence of that unseen kindness slowly reached a place inside him he had long buried, turning quiet routine into something that felt almost like connection, even if it came without a face, without a name, and without a single word spoken between them. As the days kept passing, something inside him began to shift in a way he could not explain. He started to sit a little longer after picking up the bread, holding it in his hands as if it carried a message he was trying to understand. His eyes would move across the empty land with a quiet question forming in his mind, wondering who would care enough to do this for a man who had given nothing back to the world. He never spoke about it, and never said thank you. Yet the silence inside him no longer felt as heavy as before, because each morning brought a small reminder that somewhere, somehow, someone had not forgotten him. And that thought settled deep within his chest, changing the way he saw his empty days. He began to notice how the warmth of the bread stayed longer in his hands, how the simple act of receiving it made the long hours ahead feel less cold. And without realizing it, he started to protect that moment, treating it like something fragile that could disappear if he looked too closely. Sometimes he would almost step outside before sunrise, thinking he might finally see the person behind it. But he always stopped himself at the last second, as if he was afraid that knowing the truth might break whatever this quiet connection had become. The mystery itself turned into something he depended on, something that gave his life a strange sense of meaning without asking anything in return, and slowly, the man who once avoided every form of closeness began to feel a quiet bond with someone he had never seen. He started leaving the porch cleaner than before, making sure nothing disturbed the space where the bread appeared, a silent gesture that he would never admit was his way of responding. His routine changed in small ways that only he could notice. He ate more carefully, as if respecting the effort behind each loaf. And sometimes he found himself sitting by the window, looking out into the distance longer than usual, not searching, but waiting, even though he would never call it that. And through all of this, he never tried to find the person behind it, because deep down he understood something he could not put into words, that this unseen kindness had reached him in a way nothing else ever had. And for the first time in years, he no longer felt completely alone. One morning he walked to the door with the same quiet expectation that had slowly become part of him. But as soon as he opened it, something felt different. The wooden porch stood empty under the pale light of dawn. There was no bread, no warmth, no sign that anyone had been there. He froze in place, his eyes fixed on the spot where it had always been, as if waiting for it to suddenly appear. But nothing changed. The silence around him felt heavier than ever before, pressing against him in a way he had never felt. And for the first time in years, a strange unease settled deep inside his chest. He stepped outside slowly, his boots touching the cold ground as he looked around with growing tension, scanning every direction, searching for anything that could explain what had happened. But the land remained still and empty, offering no answers. He told himself it might be nothing, maybe just one missed day. Yet that thought did not calm him, because something in his instincts whispered that this was different, that something was wrong. He stayed there longer than usual, listening carefully, hoping to catch even the faintest sound. But the wind moved quietly, as if it carried no secrets at all. He returned inside, but the emptiness followed him, filling the room with a presence that felt unfamiliar and unsettling. His routine broke in a way he could not ignore. The table looked different without the bread resting on it. The simple act he had come to rely on was suddenly gone, and it left behind a silence that felt louder than any noise. Time moved slowly that day, every hour stretching longer as his thoughts circled around the same question: why had it stopped? As the sun climbed higher, he found himself walking back to the door more than once, opening it again as if hoping he had missed something. But the porch remained empty each time, and with every passing moment, the weight in his chest grew stronger, not just confusion, but something deeper, something closer to fear, because he realized how much that unseen presence had become a part of him. And now that it was gone, it left behind a space he did not know how to fill. By evening, the quiet ranch felt colder than it ever had before, and as darkness settled in, he stood by the window looking out into the distance, no longer waiting out of habit, but out of a feeling he could no longer deny. A feeling that told him the absence of that bread was not just a small change, it was a sign that somewhere beyond his sight, something had gone terribly wrong. The next morning, he did not wait by the door. Instead, he moved with a quiet urgency he had never felt before, saddling his horse with steady hands, as that same uneasy feeling guided him without clear direction. He rode out across the open land toward the edge of town, not knowing exactly where he was going, but trusting the pull inside his chest that refused to stay silent. The wind brushed past him as the distance closed, and with every step forward, the weight of uncertainty grew stronger. When he finally reached the far side where the land looked forgotten and still, he noticed a small, worn house standing alone, its walls tired and its doors slightly open. Something about it felt fragile, as if it had been holding on for too long. He dismounted slowly and walked closer, each step careful, each breath heavier than the last. He pushed the door open gently and stepped inside where the air felt cold and still. And there, in the corner of the room, he saw her, a small, frail old woman lying weakly on a simple bed, her face pale, her breathing slow and uneven. For a moment, he stood frozen, trying to understand what he was seeing. But then his eyes moved across the room, and settled on a small table beside her, where flour rested in a worn bowl, along with a cloth and the faint smell of freshly baked bread that lingered in the air. And in that quiet instant, everything became clear. She had been the one leaving the bread for him all along, every morning, every winter, without asking for anything in return. His chest tightened as the truth settled in. He stepped closer, and she slowly opened her eyes, her gaze weak but gentle as it met his. There was no surprise in her expression, only a quiet calm, as if she had always known this moment would come. He tried to speak, but no words came out, because the weight of realization held him still. She had cared for him in silence while he remained distant, accepting her kindness without ever looking for its source. And now she was too weak to even stand, too sick to continue the simple act that had once brought warmth into his empty life. The room felt smaller as the truth filled every corner, and for the first time, he understood the depth of what he had been given, not just bread, but a quiet connection that had reached him when he needed it most. And now, seeing her lying there alone, he felt something break inside him, a deep sense of regret mixed with a need to act, because the unseen presence that had once brought him comfort was no longer a mystery. It was a person who had given more than he had ever taken the time to understand. He did not hesitate this time. He stepped closer and gently held her fragile hand as guilt rose deep within him. His silence no longer felt safe. It felt heavy with everything he had failed to see. For 3 long years she had cared for him without asking for a single word in return, and he had taken it without ever searching for the truth. But now he stayed. He brought water, lit a fire, and sat beside her through the quiet hours, not as a stranger, but as someone finally awake to what truly mattered. Days passed, and the cold ranch no longer felt empty, because his heart had changed. He was no longer the man who turned away, and when she finally smiled with weak but peaceful eyes, he understood something that would stay with him forever. That the smallest acts of kindness can carry a love so deep it changes a life even after the silence is gone.